morning, everybody. Thank you for coming on Zoom and live. I appreciate it. Our class today is sponsored in loving memory, Leilui Nishmat David ben Yaakov HaKohen Alav HaShalom. It is also dedicated in honor of Haye Gordon Deutscher and for the Shidduchim of Tova Leah Bat Shana and David Aryeh ben Rezel Rivka, sponsored, thank you, by Shimshon Deutscher. I thank you for your generosity. If anybody ever wants to sponsor a class in memory of a loved one or in honor of a loved one or for any reason whatsoever, please feel free to do so. Today we have 2 funerals and 1 wedding. We have the passing of Sarah, as well as the passing of Abraham as well as the passing of Abraham at the end of the parasha. And in the middle, we have Yitzchak and Rivka getting married. So as we start our parasha, it describes the passing of Sarah. And I think the Torah is sending us a message as well, not just about Sarah's death, but what the world has lost in terms of a luminary. Last time we had any engagement with her, she was a force to be reckoned with. She went from being inside the tent to the Petach HaOhel, to the opening of the tent. She was emerging. She was coming out of this place. I don't want to just say her own personal space where she was in the tent and Abraham was the man of the world. I want to say that she represented humanity and she represented womanhood. She recaptured a lot that was lost from the time of Chava, whereas Chava had spoken, and as a result of her actions and involvement, they were chased out of Gan Eden. And since then, women in Torah have been a little bit marginalized. We've been on the sidelines. Lot's wife doesn't have much to say. Sarah is given twice to kings. We seem to have lost not only our backbone, but our voice. And Sarah, at the end of last week, she portrays for us a woman at her best. She's the one who takes the reins. She takes her place as equal with her husband. She feels that she does have a voice and she expresses her concern as a mother for her child Yitzchak, and she has Yishmael banished. And at the same time, she makes a statement, and God is the one who confirms and supports her decision. He goes as far last week as to say, whatever Sarah, your wife, says, Shema Bekola, listen to her voice. So we went, just to get a sense, coming into Haye Sarah, we went from woman, we went from Chava. Because you listened to her voice, now look what happened. Now you lost your eternity. Now you lost your Gan Eden. You lost your utopia to what? If you want to gain eternity, if you want to gain an existence of utopia, what is God himself saying? This is not something that you need commentaries to fill in the blanks. God is saying clearly, if you want of utopia, Kol Asher, everything that Sarah, your wife, tells you, you listen to her voice. And we can't take those things lightly. That was at the end of last week, and now she passes on. And when I say she passes on, we have a void, and it needs to be filled. We need a persona who's going to come and pick up where Sarah left off. And we are praying that whoever it is that Yitzchak marries is going to have these qualities. And I don't think it's just Yitzchak. I think in a progression where we are looking to build a Jewish nation where we are looking to go from father to son, or from parents to child, which is what we're going to see today. It's no longer just this idea, Shema beni musar avicha, that a son is going to carry on the legacy of his father. This week, we're going to see in full bloom, ve'al titosh torat imecha, and don't forget the Torah of your mother. What is the Torah of the mother? Sarah started. The Torah of the mother means, and this is also very important, the Torah of the mother means that sometimes having compassion and being a parent means having to make difficult choices. A difficult choice is telling your husband, send away your son, the one that I orchestrated, the one that I suggested comes into being, the one that I said, take my ama, take my maidservant, and have a child through her. And now I'm saying, send the child and send the maidservant out. Because raising children and continuing a legacy and setting forth a nation, literally, is going to take some hard choices. And so Sarah had made those choices. Rivka is going to have her own set of choices to make. And I'm excited to introduce her to you in this week's Perashah. And so I'd like to just jump in. So we started, the Perashah starts in chapter 23 in Bereshit. I'd like to start our learning today. And maybe we should take a minute to talk about Abraham. And I'd like to say, to his credit, he recognizes what was lost. He comes lib kota. He comes to cry for her. He's the first one. First of all, she's the first Jew to die. We didn't have Judaism. We didn't have Ivrim. Abraham is the first Ivri. So she is the first Jewish person, the first person, not only monotheism, but to believe in our God Hashem. And she passes. And when she passes, everything that surrounds her passing is sort of going to set a foundation for how we're going to handle future passings. So number one is securing a burial place that is kinyan, that a person owns. We don't want to bury people somewhere that we don't own that property, because then those places could become compromised, I'll use that word, or desecrated, exactly. So Abraham realizes, imagine the man who God promised, this whole land is going to be yours. But what does he do anyway? That whole land is going to be mine, but since it's not mine today, and I need to bury my wife today, I'm going to secure property. It's called kinyan, and in securing that property, this is one of the burial places, Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, is one of the places till today that's indisputable, belongs to the Jewish people. We have the contract right here in chapter 23. And so as we move forward, there's going to be this sense of how is Abraham going to continue a journey that both of them were taking. I told you there's two parents raising a child, and now Abraham is alone left raising him. And he realizes right away what needs to happen. I'll end with the last pasuk of chapter 23, because I'd like for you to see it. Actually, go to verse 17 in chapter 23. Vayakum Sedeh Ephron, and the Sadeh, I know this sounds fantastical. It sounds Fantasia-like, Disney, where all of a sudden inanimate objects start to be infused with life and movement. It says that the Sedeh Ephron, the field of Ephron, is now doing what? Is now anthropomorphic. It's acting like a human being. It's taking on human-like movements. It's rising. And also in verse 20, Vayakom hasadeh v'hame'ara. What is happening to our physical world? All of a sudden, it's like watching a cartoon. All of a sudden, the sadeh is going up, and the machpelah, the ma'ara, the burial place. The Torah is trying to tell us something with these words. Be ready, because we're going to see that Abraham, just maybe I should take one more minute and show you in that same chapter, chapter 23, verse 3, we had Vayakom Abraham. And in verse 7, we had Vayakom Abraham. The Torah is telling us something. It's telling us in times of tragedy, in times of sadness, in times of loss, and in times of trauma, Vayakom is going to be your guiding light. This idea of Vayakom, to lift yourselves up, to have a shift from being in a place of depression to a place of elevation. It makes a cosmic change in the world. When we as human beings are able to pick ourselves up, we're not just picking ourselves up. We are having an effect on our planet to the point that a sadeh is going to do what? Is going to mirror our movements. If Abraham's going to get up, the sadeh is going to get up. And what does it mean to get up anyway? What does it mean to rise? Even if it just rises an inch. If there are shifts in the plane of our planet, if there are movements, the shifts don't happen independently. There is an effect that humanity has, that when we give honor or we give respect or we uplift ourselves, our loved ones, whatever it may be, when we put honor into the world, then what happens? The earth itself begins to behave in a way where it too is going to rise and become its best self. And in all of this, I'm only pointing these words out to you because I want to bring you to Rivka. And she is the woman we're looking for. It's a great, great week to dedicate a class for Shidduchim, because we have a Shadchan. We have the Eved of Eliezer, and he's going to make one of the greatest Shidduchs in the whole world. And we have to hope that Tova and David find their Shidduchim that are going to bring about the continuum of the legacy of the Jewish people. So how does that happen? I'll tell you one thing. The good stuff, the blessings, the happy continuum can't happen as long as we're doing what? As long as we're down and we're depressed. We're going to take one more minute. I want you to see the word liv kota. When it says that Abraham came to lispod lesara, you could see it even if you don't read Hebrew. Just look at the third line. It's the last word of the second verse. And you see the word liv kota. It has a small kaf, beautiful.
You're the best.
Very beginning of the parasha. At the end of the second pasuk, the last word. And you'll see a small chaf in there. And that small chaf in crying, I believe, represents something. Even if you see the way that, first of all, many commentaries will say liv kota means there's a small chaf, there's a limit to how much we can cry. There's a limit. It's not infinite. It's not intended to be infinite. There's supposed to be a measured, contained amount of grief. And it's not okay for it to become something that has no end or that is excessive. And the letter itself happens to be beautifully shaped. The letter chaf is shaped where you sometimes have to close the door on the past, on what's behind you, and maybe focus on what's ahead of you. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's Yortzeit was this week, and he said such a beautiful thing. He was saying that his moral mentors were survivors of the Holocaust. And he spent a lot of time speaking with them and he wanted to learn from them. And one of the things that he learned was that so many of them for 40 or 50 years, believe this, never spoke about the horrors, never spoke about the trauma, never spoke about what life was like in the camps. What did they do? They built families, they built businesses, they took that part of their life, they sort of put a wall like the back of the letter Chaf, and they said, as long as we're stuck in the past, as long as we're focused on that place of pain, we're not going to be able to move forward. And Rabbi Sachs closed that message for us to say, if you want to visit the past, you have that permission. But first, you have a future to build. Only once you build your future can you come back to that past. And we know that in therapy, and a lot of the secular therapy, the Freudian approach to therapy, for instance, if you went to Freud, he would do what? He'd lay you down on a couch and he would tell you, so tell me again, revisit it again, repeat for me again. Let's go over every detail. Go back to that place yet again. The idea is that we want to be able to make our peace with that in order to move forward. But the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, you know what they say about that approach to psychotherapy? They say that that is considered, they call it playing with the snakes. Why do they call it playing with the snakes? It means that you're in a pit like Yosef, and as long as you're in a pit with the snakes, what are the snakes doing? They're wrapping themselves around you and they're holding you hostage. We have to be so careful. And this is being said by a person, Rabbi Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who's teaching us all of our history and all of the past, is saying you want to visit your history and you want to learn from the past, absolutely. But don't get stuck on the in those painful places, because those painful places will be exactly what is going to hold you from being able to move forward. And so with all of this put together, what Abraham does is a lesson for all of us. He actually, one more thing in the name of Rabbi Sachs, because it is his Yortzeit week, he had said about Viktor Frankl, who was also a psychologist, who was actually treating people in the camps while he himself was an inmate, imagine. And he created this psychology called logotherapy. And logotherapy was, somebody had, I think Rosemary on our Zoom had recommended the book from Edith Eger, the same type of idea, which was picture in your mind, transport yourself to a place where you are accomplishing something that only you could accomplish. While you're in a place of pain, the story, the choice, and the gift, she wrote 2 books, Edith Eger, I think we mentioned them last year. This woman, who was also a survivor, had said she pictured herself when she was, I think it was Auschwitz, I'm not sure, and she had to perform. They knew she was a dancer, and she had to perform, I think it was Dr. Mengele. It was really harsh stuff. I read it last year, so I don't remember the details, but más o menos, the main idea was that she transported herself, the power that the mind has to transport itself to a place where we can survive, not just where we can survive. This logotherapy is transporting ourselves to a place where we will be thriving. And in thriving, so she was dancing and she imagined to herself while she's dancing in front of this monster who murdered her family, whose smokes and things are going on around her. She knows that at any minute, she could be another number on the tally. She took herself in her mind, which says the mind is such a powerful place. And she took herself and made believe that she was dancing in some, I don't know, famous ballet house or something like that. And that's where she was. And that's how she was able to will her limbs to move. And all of this entire idea is Abraham now is at a crossroads. Do I curl up and just stay home depressed, or do I get to work? And of course, he chooses to get to work. And in chapter 24, it's telling us it's not easy for him. He's zaken baba yamim. He's old already. The older we get, the less flexible we are, the less nimble we are, the harder it is to move on a dime. But still, he decides that what? He's going to call his Eved. And throughout this story, this Shidduch story, this romance novel that the Torah gives us, which of course is wrought with so much more than just intrigue and excitement and drama, there's so much more in here that we're going to have to now unpack. But throughout the story, the Shadchan is called the Eved, the servant of Abraham. So I might slip every now and then and say Eliezer, because that's who Rashi identifies as the Shadchan, as the one who is sent to bring a wife. By the end of his story, this Eved, which means servant, his name is going to change, and he's going to become an Ish, a man of import. He's not going to be a servant, he's going to be an important role, an important figure. So we'll talk about a little bit of that as well, hopefully. But he calls the Eved and he tells him, please place your hand on my thigh. I'm in verse 3, chapter 24. Ashbi acha, let me have you swear in the name of God, the God of the heavens and the God of the earth. And then he says that you're not going to take a wife for me from Benot Canaan. Benot Canaan, what's so horrific about Benot Canaan? Why can't we take a wife from Benot Canaan? What do we know about the Canaanim that makes them toxic? And thank you, one of the children of Noah, and I'm going to say maybe that child is actually the grandchild of Noah. I think we had done this in a previous class. If we could do it quickly, it might pay for you to see, because it's so important that we know what Abraham is looking for. He's looking for, and this is where we're going to have a little conversation. I had a debate last night with my daughter-in-law, Simone. She's a doctorate in psychology, so who am I to debate with her? We were having the nature-nurture debate and what things are genetically passed down from parent to child and what isn't genetically passed down. I'm going to talk about that. But so let me tell you this. I'd like to establish who Canaan is with a certain reading of the text. If there are children in the room, you might want to cover their ears. It is pretty a harsh reading of the text. I'm in chapter 9 in Bereshit, Parashat Noach, verse 18. I'll do it as quickly as I can just so that we're all together on board. So Noach has 3 sons who came out of the Teva. And those 3 sons are Shem, Ham, and Yafet. But you know what? You know who's the father of Canaan? Ham is the father of Canaan. Now, why are you telling me this little piece of information? What do I need to know who the father of Canaan is at this point? And why do I have to need to know Noach's 3 sons if I already knew them from the beginning of the Perashah? And I believe that this story is here to tell us a secondary story that they're trying to keep as G-rated as possible. And I will too. It says, Shlosha Elu, make no mistake. How many sons does Noah have? Now, the Torah doesn't waste words. And it's a hard message for me to say in a Perashah, Haye Sarah, where it tells the whole story of Eved Abraham, and then it tells the whole story again. But trust me, nothing is wasted in these Parshiot. So when they tell us that these are the three sons of Noah, and from them the whole world came about, and in that same story, that's the introduction to the Noah getting drunk and planting a vineyard after the destruction. So Noah also had a trauma. What was Noah's trauma? If Abraham's trauma was Vayakom, Noah's trauma was Vayered. There's no question that he's going to go Vayachel. He goes from Kodesh, from Sadiq Tamim. He goes from this high elevated persona to become a person that becomes mundane and chol. And they even call him Ish Ha'adama. He's a man. Remember, he was Et HaElohim. He was the man who was walking together with God. What happened to Noah? He becomes an Ish Adama, a man of the land. Vayitakarim, and he plants a vineyard. And he drinks from the wine. And this is where it gets a little hazy, because things get a little hazy when we drink too much wine. So he gets drunk. And then it seems to be saying that he became uncovered in his tent. For today, I'd like to translate those words a little bit more accurately. Vayitgal betoch ohala. And either he or she became uncovered in her tent. Whose tent are we talking about? Because the word ohalo is a kriyuchtiv. And see, it's written like her tent. Who's her tent? And I'm talking about Noah's wife. And what happens? Ham, his son, who, by the way, in case you didn't notice, in verse 18, I'm going to tell you again, Ham is the father of Canaan. Why do you keep telling me this? Why do I keep having to know that Ham is the father of Canaan? Because unfortunately, what's going to happen is, unfortunately, what does he do? He sees Ervat Aviv. And we had said Ervat Aviv, the nakedness of his father. What is the nakedness of his father? How do we translate those words? I don't even know what Ervat Aviv means. I only could figure out what Ervat Aviv means if I go to, and you don't have time, but if you go to Sefer Vayikra, chapter 18, and you look at verse 7, and you go to verse 7, you'll see there, Ervat avicha ve'ervat imecha lo tegale. Imecha. It's your mother. Wait a minute. It's changing our story, and it's very uncomfortable, and it's no longer a G-rated story if I tell you that Noah is sitting drunk and Ham is seeing not just the nakedness of his father, which we might have thought it was. Who's he seeing? He's seeing his mother. And he goes and he tells his two brothers about it. Now, the two brothers, Shem and Yafet, they take a simla, which sounds like a woman's dress. And what do? They put it on their shoulders, they walk backwards, and they cover Ervat Avihem. They cover the nakedness of their father, which according to Sefer Vayikra is actually their mother. They're covering their mother. And they never face her. And when Noah wakes up, he realizes what his son did to him. And he says, cursed is Canaan, Eved Avadim, to his brothers. To fill in the blanks, in case any of you didn't catch the storyline because the Torah was a little bit cryptic about it. I keep telling you, says the Torah, that Ham, the one who saw whatever he saw, he is the father of Canaan. Why do I have to tell you that? Because if Noah's wife gave birth to this Canaan, you might think that Noah is the father. but this child, Canaan, was born. It says clearly that Ham is the father of Canaan. And because of this, I don't want to talk about how horrific the incest is. It's not just your father's wife, it's also your mother. Doesn't get worse than that. So I only took you to this, and it's not my happy place. I'd much rather talk about rainbows. But Avraham, when he tells us in this week's Perashah, whatever you do, stay away from those Kenaanim. What is he saying? He's teaching all of us a lesson, and this was the debate I had with my daughter-in-law. Are behaviors hereditary? Do they get passed down? And so now the epigenetics, that's what she said. There's a whole study, and there's actually a debate of whether or not it changes genetically, or so that would be the nature, or whether who we are today is dependent on how we were nurtured. Is my mom's effect on me something that turned me into this person because of her teachings? Or is it because of who she is that when she birthed me, it's in my DNA? And now it's a very big question, because we're going to find Rivka. And when we meet Rivka, the question is going to be, is Rivka a daughter of her father and her brother, the shysters? Or is she her own person? Does she already have a predetermined nature? How much of her nurture is going to play a role? And the commentaries have a party with this. You think thousands of years ago, they didn't know psychology? You didn't think the commentaries don't jump right in when they say that she said to her son, Yaakov, to go and go around about and get the blessing. And we'll talk about that, God willing, next week. They say what? It's in her blood. It's in her nature to do these kinds of things. And so there's a big question out there. And we're going to have to really look at the verses and see where they're going to take us in terms of, and what do we need to understand the Rivka? Because if we're part of her DNA, we have to understand that. And as parents, bringing forth the next generation ourselves, we need to understand. So I'll start with this. When the Eved of Eliezer is going to go and look for a wife, so we got it. Abraham said, Canaani women, they are out of bounds. I don't want anybody whose ancestor was incestuous with his own mother. That's totally not going to carry itself into my future progeny. That's out. Then he says this, it's crazy. If you read the words and you're following along in verse 4, he says, Ki el artzi ve'el moladeti telech. What does it sound like? Artzecha, moladetecha, bet avicha, right? What is he saying? He's telling his servant, I made my lech lecha, and I left my land, and I left my father's place. And we're reading this and we're saying, and now that's where you're going back to find the shidduch for your son, to the place that you left? We could read it that way, or we could read it that now when Rivka does come along with the servant and does agree to marry Yaakov, that she is Avraham 2.0, that she's going to do the same exact journey that Avraham did. She's going to leave from the same place, from the same family, from the same birthplace, from the same culture. She's going to, and how magnificent is the Torah to portray a woman who 2 weeks ago didn't have a voice. Last week, she gained her voice, and now Rivka is going to come and stand in the shoes, not just of Sarah, We would have been happy, Dayenu, you gave us a new Sarah. No, says the Torah. Women are going to have the ability to be who? The Avrahams of the world. Why are you limiting yourself? Why are you saying that I should just be like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, when the Torah is going to make Rivka exactly like who? Every word they're going to use to describe Rivka is going to be synonymous with who? With Abraham. She gets these guests. So let's talk about this quickly. And before we get to her behaviors, what does the Eved say? This is for us. Does he say the woman with the greatest SAT scores? Does he say the one who graduates with honors? Does he say the one that goes to, what can I say? What is he looking for? What's the pedigree that he's looking for? And you're going to use the word chesed. I'm going to say chesed today. I'm going to translate as compassion. And I want to talk about the difference between empathy and compassion for a minute. So let's go slowly. Why is he looking for something with somebody with chesed? Because in our argument, my belief system, I can't genetically pass that down to my children. Beliefs are not part of my epigenetic makeup. What does make its way genetically into my children's beings? My actions. This is a crazy thing. It took me a very long time to process this. My physical actions actually change me and who I am and allow that to be transferred to the next generation. So when Eliezer, the Eved, is looking for a wife, he wants to find somebody, her belief system is actually not the first thing I'm looking for, because that's not going to get transferred. But her actions, and what does he say? What's the test? The test is the woman who's going to bring water for me and my camels. That's going to be why. Why is that the test? Why not the woman who says, Baruch Hashem le'el elyon koneh shamayim va'aretz, the first woman to utter God's name? She's the one. Why isn't that the test? Because beliefs are not genetic, behaviors are. Second. And now, yes, so that was the debate, which is a lot of what you see, thank you, a lot of what you see and a lot of what you were raised with becomes a part of who you are, clearly. And then you can talk about what you see in terms of action. Because what my mother says is one thing. What my mother does is another thing completely. And in all of the studies, people are much more likely to repeat behaviors that they've witnessed than verbal lessons or instructions that they've given. Give me one more second. And that's why it's Torah, Shema Beni, it's Musar Avicha. Musar is something that's handed down verbally, but don't forget Torah, the guidance of the mother. The mother and her actions and what she does, and it's not always the big things. And kids are always watching. You think they're not, but they are. You think they're not watching the small things. It's those little things. It's that I'm not going to waste the last edge of the bread. I'm going to cut it into croutons and use it again. It's that I'm not, whatever those little things that you think nobody even is focusing on, believe it or not, those are the things that your kids are going to internalize. Yes.
I read on the text last week that according to the Zohar, the consumption of marriage, the union between man and woman, being as an act, power to alter the genetic code of the children, because basically the child will inherit the epigenetic from the dad, the genetics from the mom, and then create another code that will have
Beautiful.
a mixture of the two. That's why it's very important.
Beautiful.
The marriage.
So I'm just going to repeat for our Zoomers, the idea in Kabbalah of a union between husband and wife is actually an opportunity to bring about a new creation, because the combination of the genetics of the two is what is going to bring. And what does Abraham want to ensure? What does he want to secure? He wants to secure. Now he's going to bring, he himself is Mr. Chesed, but guess what? Are him and Yitzchak the same person?
No, because
Sarah, he had Sarah. So he needs to bring somebody for Yitzchak that is going to be able to bring and balance in the genetic pool to be able to bring a whole human. And I'm going to say these words because it's important. The Greeks, for instance, they will translate the word compassion, kompati, meaning with suffering. It means I'm with you in suffering. That's how they will translate what compassion is. Judaism, we don't call it, I'm using the word compassion, maybe even the English word is nice, compassion, with passion, with intensity, with movement, with action. That's the compassion that I'm referring to when I talk about Rivka. And we'll see her behaviors and we'll track her and see what she does the minute she meets the servant of Eliezer. We fall in love with her right away. There's nothing to talk about. She's just a persona that is complete. Why am I telling you about her? Let's meet her together. So, of course, I told you everybody is doing this Vayakom this week. So why not the Eved in verse 10? He takes 10 camels from his, this is also, by the way, just a little commercial break for our father-in-laws and mother-in-laws to be. This is very important, which is if you want to get a good girl from a good family with good values, with chesed, with compassion, what do you say, ma? Que te cueste. It's going to cost you. What does that mean even? What does that mean it's going to cost you? Yeah. He takes 10 camels and he takes all of his master's things, belongings with him. Vayakom vayelech. He's also going to do what? He's going to rise to the occasion. He's going to move forward, but he's not coming empty-handed. And know the nature of humans. And I'm sorry to say, if you're going to offer nothing, I know in the romance novels of Aladdin and everything, it's very nice and very beautiful, but in the real world, you want a woman to leave Arza and Moladeta and Bet Abiha, and you want her to leave with no promise, no security, no anything. She's not, I mean, nobody, no human being is that. I don't even know if I want to call it altruistic. I want to call it maybe simple. 1 second, commercial break. Vivien Hidary, my daughter-in-law Barbara. Could you turn her this way? Oh my God. I'm sorry. It's
we want to see the baby.
my
Turn her around.
granddaughter. I'm going to bring her to the forefront, but she's right now totally strapped in with 700 straps. But you'll all get to see her. This is the
She shows
problem.
up the baby.
Who's baby?
Her granddaughter showed them. They didn't show her yet. Her daughter-in-law came with little Vivien Hidary. It's okay.
Anymore. Okay, I remember.
Where is she now?
In Safra Synagogue in Manhattan.
Bringing her to the screen as soon as we get a minute. If you stay till the end of the class, then you'll get to see her. How's that for
That's not fair. I want to watch you.
Come on. All right, we lost everybody here is gone. I'm gonna only talk to my Zoomers
Is
now.
it, how did you get this?
The little girl.
What is it on?
You killed us.
Zoom,
I
Vivien
know, but
Hidary.
through whom?
Okay.
I don't know, I just went to Zoom and Vivien Hidary.
No, I know, but
Yes.
whose
Could
email?
you mute
Who's the
yourselves, please?
auspices?
We can't hear Vivien.
Yes, I'm gonna mute
I'd like
everybody
to
else.
start
I'm
listening to her
sorry
as well.
about that little, that was great. Okay, so we were talking, about the servant bringing things to welcome the new bride into Abraham's house. And it's not something trivial. And we shouldn't think, oh, it's all about the materialism. We're physical beings. We live in a material world. And yes, we need security. And yes, we need to know that if we're leaving our father's house and we're going to some unforeseen place with an unforeseen person, we need to know that it's going to be either better, exactly, or Lavan and Betuel were not poor people. So you can't expect her to just leave the familiarity of what she has. And I'll say this just in case we think that we want to be so unmaterialistic. But the truth is, when Abraham left his family and his birthplace, he had an assurance from God. Avarechecha, don't worry. Because it's natural to worry when we change our place or our space, that we might not have the comforts, the human comforts that we need. And I think it's so generous of the Torah to acknowledge that. No, we're not being petty. We're being smart, because as humans, we must survive. And survival means I need to know that I'm going to be able to eat. I need to know that there are going to be certain comforts that my body has gotten accustomed to in order for me to be able to thrive. So I always appreciate this part of the Torah where it recognizes and it even celebrates. And it's by the way, if you're a mother-in-law, it's a lesson to mother-in-laws saying, wow, you want to bring a daughter-in-law into your family, you need to welcome her. And you need to bring her with camels and with nose rings. I know nobody wants camels or nose rings today, but there's a lot out there. Don't worry. It's a lot out there. And it's the way of the Torah to say that women should be treasured, should be bedecked with beautiful things. We should put crowns on their heads. We should laden them with all of the beautiful things that the world has to offer. Why do we have to be monks thinking that we're living in a world that we don't need or want anything? There are beautiful things. God put beautiful gemstones in the world for us to enjoy them. I'm thinking of gem, and it's the truth. And so here, this is in case anybody goes shopping this week and the Amex bill comes, you could blame it on me because the truth of the matter is, it's yeah, exactly. It's okay. It's okay. And let's move forward. 1 second. Excuse me. Okay, let's move forward. One of the beautiful things that happens, with Rivka is we see the language that's used when she and the Eved come together. First of all, let's start with verse 15. Vehine Rivka yotzet. Remember, Sarah was inside the Ohel? Where is Rivka? She's engaging with the world. She is outside. And just so that we know, the Torah gives her the accolades. She is Yulda. She was birthed to Betuel, to Milcah, the wife of Nahor, the brother of Abraham. What are they telling us? She's Moladeti. She's Artzi. She's Bet Avi. She's all the things that Abraham had asked for. And then what happens? She's also Tovat Mar'eh. She's physically beautiful. She's a Betula. She's an eligible bachelorette. She is a woman who's never been with a man before. And what does she do? When she goes down to the springs, Vatemale Kada. These are all physical things, which mean that she takes her bucket and she fills it. But what is it on a metaphorical level? What type of person is Rivka? She's a person who's always, what's Akkad? If you want to talk about Kabbalism, we're all vessels. And to the extent that we fill our vessels with light, with water, which is life, to the extent that we're going to fill our vessels, that is what's going to make us who we ultimately, what we ultimately become. Let's continue. And what does she do? Vayarot ha'eved, the Eved runs towards her, and she says, Shte Adoni, the same way that Abraham had told his guests, and he called them what? Adonai, my masters. She's even sounds like, she acts like Abraham, she speaks like Abraham. Vatemahed, remember he was by Yemahed, he was running with those angels, hurry up, make the bread, make the thing, he's zipping, zapping. She's too Vatemahed. And again it says, Vatemahed, she's very quickly, Vatarot, she's running, just as he had run. All of the verbs surrounding what's taking place are Avraham-like verbs. Again, I can't stress this enough. We have paradigms in our mind, and we say, oh, Avraham Avinu, Mafi Mitlo. There's no other one. There's one Avraham Avinu, and they broke the mold. You can't have two Avraham Avinus. It's impossible. But yet the Torah goes out of its way to describe Rivka exactly like who? Exactly like Avraham Avinu. To say that, what? Don't limit your version of yourself or who you could become. And if your icon is Abraham or Moshe or Yosef or Yehuda or whoever you choose as an icon, you're not allowed to tell yourself that that is only reserved, that greatness is reserved or exclusive to biblical characters. It's not. And stop putting yourself in a box. Oh, only men could do this, only women could do this. This idea of chesed, of zirizut, of filling up your vessel, this is not something that's just a gender-oriented thing. This is intended for everybody. We're going to see that Rivka is going to take the lead in much of her life. She's going to play a starring role. You know why? Because she casts herself in that starring role. And we go through the whole story. She passes the test just to make the story Cliff Notes quicker. She gives him to drink. She gives the camels to drink. There's a reversal of order. We could talk about that another day. But what happens? In verse 35, Hashem, he says, God, the God, our Hashem that we've been talking about, the Yud Kei Vav Kei in verse 35, chapter 24, he blessed my master. He made him great. He gave him tzon. He gave him bakat. He gave him silver. He gave him gold. He gave him servants and maidservants and camels and donkeys. You're interviewing for a job? What are you doing here? You're showing somebody your entire spreadsheet of, what's that called? Your, there's two letters like it, not DNA. There's something, you know, like your Dun & Bradstreet report or whatever they call that. You're showing your entire credit report. Thank you. You're showing your whole credit report. What are you doing? Yeah, guess what? I want to make sure that I'm giving my daughter to a family who's going to be able to take care of her. And so here he was instructed to say a lot of this, and a lot of it he took on it, he said on his own. And now we have, I want to just show you a couple of words along the way to bring us to the next phase. In verse 43, Hine anochi nitzav al en hamayim vehaya. And he's telling them the whole story of how he came to find Rivka and why she's the perfect one. But what does the Eved say about himself? He says, I was Nitzav. And of all of the characters, animate and inanimate, that rise up and rise to the occasion and become their best selves, this Eved Abraham, and I'd like to suggest that they don't give him a name. because every one of us has the potential and the capacity to be an Eved, to be a ambassador, to be the one that goes out there and accomplishes a goal. And how do we accomplish a goal? The Eved of Abraham is going to tell us. So I always say, if the name of the person is missing, it's an invitation to insert our own name there. And who is this Eved Abraham? What is he doing? He is Mutsav. He is Nitzav. He doesn't see himself as a servant. What does he see himself as? Mutsav. What did we say a Nitziv is? Well, a Nitziv is either a monument, something that is strong and planted and immovable, or a commander. A Nitziv in the army, right? He would be a commander. He's not just Omed al En Hamayim. And part of becoming who we want to be, part of becoming our best self, part of that is going to require that we see ourselves as more than who we just are. He's an Eved. It's not his camels. He's just he's the UPS, FedEx delivery person who's taking something from point A to point B. But he doesn't see himself that way. And because he doesn't see himself that way, the Torah describes him as being nitzav. You know, they use that term for the ladder. We're going to encounter in a few weeks. Mutzav arza. A ladder is what's going to connect heaven and earth. If we see our small roles that we play in the world, sometimes I'm not the president, I'm not the queen, I'm not the number one slot, I'm just a little cog in the wheel that's moving history along. But guess what? I could be the best darn cog you've ever seen. And this Eved is going to be the best darn Eved anybody ever saw. And because of that, all of history is going to be affected. And the Torah is telling us, don't see yourself as a small little part in the play, in the back, in the chorus, in the third tier in the back over there. You sing your part. You play your role to the best that you can, and the entire symphony will be affected by it. And that's what Eliezer brings to the table. His little tiny piece of role that he probably saw himself, he didn't see himself, he could have seen himself as what? Don't look at me, I'm just a messenger. Yeah, but you're Abraham's messenger, and every one of us here is God's messengers. And as messengers of God and children of Abraham, we owe it to ourselves to see ourselves, to spiffy ourselves up, stand a little straighter, be a little stronger, and walk around with a little more of a nitziv, a sense of pride where we're standing with a certain stature that says, what? I take my role, small as it may be, in the whole scheme of things. How big? I'm afar va'efed. In one hand, I'm holding a paper that says I'm nothing, I'm dust. But at the other hand, what do I have to hold? The whole world was created for me. So whatever job it is that we're taking, whatever role it is that we're playing, we need to take it and play it to the best of our abilities, as if the entire world, the entire play, the entire show, the entire narrative depends on my small role, because ultimately it does. And that's what the Torah wants to come and teach us in this story. This little Eved ends up having a huge effect on what takes place. And sure enough, later on, they're going to go and call him because he sees himself, and this is probably the most important part of the story, because he sees himself as more than just a servant, just following orders, ma'am. It's not saying that. He takes matters into his own hands. Just 10 seconds, we should say, good for him. They gave him a job. He's saying, shoot, how am I going to do this? I can't take from Canaan. My master's going to have my head. The girl's going to have to come with us. How am I going to pull this off? And then what does he do? He goes rogue. He comes up with his own plan and his own scheme, and he says, I have a plan. I'm going to make, this is my mother's the queen of this. I'm going to put it in Hashem's hands. It's his problem. I'm going to say, look, I got this far. I came as far as I can. And now what? I came. I brought the camels. I brought the nose rings. I brought the donkeys. I did everything you said. I trudged my way back to Ya'atzecha and back to Yemoladetecha, and now I'm here, and I really don't have a plan. I don't know how who's going to be able to find the right one? How do I know which is the right one? It's a big job you gave me. And then what does he say? He says, you know what, God, I love Abraham and I love you, but you're his God. And you guided him until now, and this is as far as I could take it. At this point, I'm throwing it back up to you, Hashem. You take it from here. You present me with the girl who's going to give water, which is a sign of compassion. And not just that she has empathy for thirsty wayfarers and camels, but she's going to do it with passion, with a sense of hurry. And what happens when we do that? You know what God says? Poor guy's right. He's not a professional shadchan. How's he supposed to know who to bring? Let me bring the girl to him, since he has no idea what he's doing. And all of these are small little lessons that sort of take us in that direction. And I didn't realize it was so late, but I'll wrap it up anyway.
Something about Ish.
Yes, I'm going to tell it to you right this minute. So what happens? All along, we're calling him Eved Abraham, Eved Abraham. We had called him Ish twice. If you have your own Chumashim, it would be great. So you could circle where it says Ish and where it says Eved, but I'll show you this one because I think it's very important and it brings the whole class together to full circle. And there's another lesson to be taught in here as well. So the Eved brings out, and again, the Torah is going into a lot of detail talking about the Swanny. I mean, here we have again, in verse 52, when the Eved hears what they said, they bow, and in 53, he takes out Kle Zahav, Kle Kesef, Kle Zahav. If you're looking for a shopping list for a Swanny, and it's here, I don't make these things up, this is right here. There's silver, there's gold, there's begadim, very possibly furs back in the day. I mean, they were shepherds and everything, so don't be shy. He gives it to Rivka, and he even gives, which is very, very nice, he even gives beautiful fruits to her brothers and to her mother. This is not a time to be stingy. We're bringing in the new arusa to our house, right? What are we doing? We're being nice to her mother. We're using, my kids used to say, oh, that's for when your consuegros come. Like you have a special whatever that you never use, but you're saving them in the closet for the day that your in-laws are gonna come into your house. And they're the ones who are allowed to use that. Yeah, says the Torah, you better be sure that that's what's going to happen. That the best that you have to offer is not only what you're offering her, but her family. You're recognizing that she comes from somewhere. She didn't just fall off a tree. That tree is still part of who she is. Anyway, they eat, they drink, the whole story. Vayakumu baboker, here everybody's getting up in the morning, and then we have like the music changes. Shoot. The family says, you know what? Maybe let her stay yamim or asor. You know what yamim are in text? Yamim are not a couple of days. Yamim are shanim. Yamim are years. They're looking to delay the plan. Let's not send her this minute. Let's, maybe wait a couple of years. And the Eved says, I'm sorry, but I need to take her back with me. I need to go back to Adoni, to my master. I'm on a mission here. And this, nobody should forget. Put a marker in your Humashim. It's verse 57, chapter 24. All the single ladies now, they need to know this. And it says, what are they going to say? We don't know. To stop for a commercial break. Her family wants the delay. He's saying, please, I'm on a mission. We go to a commercial break. And the reader doesn't know what's going to happen. And now we come back and we read it. And you know what they say? Nikrala ne'ara v'nish'ala et piha. If I started to tell you that women are not second-class citizens in a civilization. This verse says, and don't forget, women were property. Daughters were property. Anybody watch Fiddler on the Roof? Of course you did. What say does the woman have in who Yenta is going to bring to marry her? Well, guess what the Torah has to say? Means halachically, you cannot marry off a girl without her consent. And what does she say is even more beautiful. You can't make this up. They ask her and they say, Hatelchi. And what does she say? Elech. Oh, who else was Hatelchi Elech? Who else was Elech Lecha? Ruth, yes, and who else? Abraham himself. I will leave my mother's house. I will leave my father's house. I will leave my birthplace and my cultures and everything that I know to go to an unknown place. I will, because I am going to continue. What was that? We thought Abraham wanted a wife for Yitzchak, but you know what he really wanted? Because he was Zaken, Baba Yamim, because he was old. He needed not just to find and ensure that there'll be a child through Yitzchak, he needed to ensure that what? Somebody would continue his legacy. And that's why the text is so beautiful, and I can't help it, but the verse 61, circle it if you own your Chumash, Vatakom Rivka. If there was a musical score that came with this parasha, this would be a crescendo. Now Rivka why is Rivka being so elevated in this story? Because she rises to the occasion, then what happens? She becomes herself that much greater. And you asked me about the Ish. So she gets up, and she doesn't just get up metaphorically. She gets up physically. She gets on top of the camel and she follows the Ish. That was for you. She follows the Ish because it says, Vayikach ha'eved et Rivka vayelech. The Torah is calling him not just an Eved. He's no longer just an Eved, because when you have stamped on your resume, mission accomplished, I don't care if your line of work is Eved. When you have mission accomplished stamped on it, you're no longer an Eved. You became an Ish. And I'll end with this last, I'm sorry if I went over time. If anybody has to leave, I won't be offended, but I just want to make this one last.
But why did you say that? Pasuk 61 says, Vayikach ha'eved et Rivka.
I
It reverts
understand
back to Eved.
The first part calls him an Ish, and the second part calls him an Eved. He was by definition or by trade an Eved, but the Torah is going to put the word Ish on top of, it's not negating that he was an Eved. It's saying because he was an Eved and he carried out his mission.
So now he becomes an Ish.
Now the Ish, the term Ish is going to be on his label before the word Eved. It's going to supersede his identity. And let's finish off with this last idea because I think it's a beautiful one. The last idea is at the top of page 120, verse 63, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. I'd like to end with this idea. I think the parasha is taking us in a certain direction. And it says, where is Yitzchak? All of this time, he's in the wings. We don't know anything about him. Since Akedat Yitzchak, we really haven't seen him. We haven't spoken to him. We don't know where he's at. But verse 63 tells us that Yitzchak had gone out lasuach basadeh. What does lasuach mean?
To meditate.
Rabbis say lasuach means either to medicate or lehitpalel, to pray. I'd like to take a much simpler approach to the word lasuach, which means a sicha, which means to converse, to have a conversation. And we know that the sadeh is a place of divine encounter. And he goes lifnot erev, which means that it's the time of tefillat mincha. And he lifts his eyes and he sees the camels coming and all that. But I'd like to talk about this. If he's going to establish, like the rabbis say, tefillat mincha, Then who established Tefillat Shacharit? And we say, oh, it was Abraham, because he woke up early in the morning. And in the morning, he established the prayer that one says in the morning. And what is happening in the morning? The sun's beginning to rise. Zippity doodah, everything's going my way. In the morning, we have this ideal. How many times I wake up in the morning and I say, today, no sugar, no carbs, no this. My intent in the morning is that my day is going to be A-okay and everything's going to go according to my morning plan. But by mid-afternoon, what happens? By mid-afternoon, Abraham is saying, or Yitzchak is teaching us, that we can't go it alone, that we need to have this sicha. We need to be in a constant conversation with God, and the conversation has to be one that recognizes that we can't go it alone, because going it alone is going to be too difficult for us to reach a goal. And this idea of sicha, of conversation, is shown beautifully in Perek Shirah. What do they say in Perek Shirah? Perek Shirah is the book, we believe King Solomon wrote it, where he gives voice to all of the creatures in the world, the frogs, the sun, the wind, every element of the natural world gets ascribed a voice. And then he takes the barley.
Happened to voice.
Now, what is barley? It's the food of the animals. It's the fodder. It's the cheapest, lowest food. And what would the barley say? Tefillah la'ani. His tefillah, his prayer. The barley is saying, my prayer is the prayer of the poor person. Ki ya'atof. As he shucks, is that the word? Shuckle is a word for doing this. Shuck, as he's shucking like this. He's waving, he's vulnerable. He's like a barley that the wind is pushing him this way and pushing him that way. Tefillah la'ani ki ya'atof. This is what it says in Perek Shirah about the barley. And then it says, V'lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicho. Before God, he's going to pour out sicho, his conversation. The nature of the poor person is to be in constant conversation with God. And that constant conversation, and again, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and the merit and the honor and the memory of Rabbi Sachs, he had put out a weekly reader. It was called Covenant and Conversation. I believe the covenant was Abraham, who made so many covenants with God. And in order for those covenants to continue, Yitzchak is coming here and telling us what. In order for the covenant to be activated, you need to be in constant conversation with God. We talk about Tevye all the time, since we were on the fiddle on the roof with Yenta and everybody. If that's our attitude, if that's how we go through life, if we are recognizing that in order to take the next steps forward in our day, yes, in the morning, I got this, but by the afternoon, I need help. Eved Abraham, he wasn't shy. He had a conversation with God and said, I got you this far. I can't do any more now. The rest is up to you. It's those of us who are in constant conversation with God, who God will respond to. And just to show you the flip side, and maybe we'll end with this. If that's what the barley is saying, what does the wheat say? I think the wheat, the rich guy, the one who's satisfied, Saveya, he's in need for nothing. He has everything he wants. You know what he says in Perek Shirah? 3 words. Mima amakim keraticha Adonai. The voice of the wheat is, God, I'm calling you from the lowest of low, from the depths of depths, from the bottom of the bottom. Mima amakim, you know that from Tehillim. I'm calling you from the lowest of the bottoms, because the person who is physically wealthy is very often spiritually devoid. Because the more you have, the less you need to be in a constant conversation with God. You need him every second like Tevye. So the rich man, says King Solomon, you think if I were a rich man, right? You think if you were a rich man that you'd sit and learn all day, but the likelihood is, even if you would learn all day, how much conversation are you having on a minute-to-minute survival basis? And so what's Yitzhak here to teach us? He's here to teach us, you want the covenant to continue, then the conversation has to continue. And never, look, I'm not saying that we're wheat or we're barley, but I'm saying that if Yitzhak is going to be lasuach basadeh, if the way that he engages in tefillah, in prayer, or in meditation, if that is having a familiarity with God, because that's what a sicha is, a conversation is with somebody that's that you're having a dialogue with, that you're very, very comfortable and familiar with. If that's your approach to life, then you're going to have an opportunity, and we'll end at the end of that perek, where what's going to happen? He's going to find a wife. Doesn't say this all the time in text. Don't take this for granted. He's going to love his wife. And what does that mean? He's going to be whole in a relationship. And if you love your wife, in order to be whole, it takes two wholes to make a marriage. It's not two halves. It's not your better half. It's two whole people coming together. And how was he whole? He was able to have a conversation. He was able to be a whole person, and she was a whole person. And that's what's going to bring about the next generation.